This is Powertrip. This is from Genuine Comics, and this isn't a single issue. This is a anthology of 3 stories. So you've got Auxilium, Man Devil, and American Bliss. And this is a pretty fun book. All these stories are really short. They're like in the 8 to 10 page range. So there isn't really much story or development in any one of these stories, but the insights you do get into the Genuineverse, I think, is worthwhile. Auxilium is basically only that. So Joan Lavelle is really just telling a more expository, as in there's a lot of exposition, there's a lot of establishing scenes, and it all happens after this initial scene of action, and there's like one little scene in the end that ties up everything together, basically, you know, taking place after a power plant is destroyed. It's an interesting story. You have this character, Jonathan Pratt, who is Virgil Pratt's son, who is a very important character in Perfect 10. Jonathan and Virgil have a scene in Perfect 10 issue number 2. So it's interesting to see him again, but there really isn't much character development since the story is so short, but it's a nice little insight into Auxilium, and it gives, you know, more setup for stories to happen later in the Genuineverse. So for what that is, I think Auxilium is pretty good. And it is, I would say, presented pretty well. I think some of the faces could be rendered a little bit better, but all of the important action scenes and everything that needs to hit, I would say, hits quite well. And that is Auxilium. So next we're going on to Man Devil. So Man Devil is from Daniel Rydelis, who is creator and writer of this. David Jackson doing the pencils and ink, and Nestor Radula Jr. Coloring the book. And this book was lettered by HTE, who lettered Perfect 10 issue number 1, if I'm getting that correctly, which I think I am. And I would say there's a comic book artist, Narwhal. I've read some of the stuff. Earthbound is pretty good. And this style reminds me sort of Narwhal. And, you know, Narwhal's got this really, say, absurdist, but he's got this very atypical way of drawing this style that's off-putting to a lot of people. But once you get used to it, it's really good. And it reminds me of that, but without the, I don't know, there's just this attention to detail that Narwhal has, and this way he ties everything together visually that makes it for that good visual experience that I really like with Narwhal books, and other people will find off-putting. This has just like that off-putting, atypical style, but it's not tied together in the best way. You know, some stuff like this it just looks a bit bland. It looks a bit dry. It definitely could be more improved. And given the fact that Man Devil doesn't show up in Perfect 10, these characters have very little room to breathe and time to develop in this story. So what's shown here is interesting. I definitely would, you know, read a Man Devil number 1 based off of this. I would pick that up, or, you know, having his story, you know, be continued in Powertrip as a series of short stories is definitely something I'm willing to see. But there isn't much reason to get super invested in this character, and with the art being, I would say, pretty average, doesn't make this book really stand out or feel like stellar and superb, especially when you compare it to, you know, the canon of Genuine Comics. But that is Man Devil. It's a serviceable story, but it's definitely nothing to really write home about. But this last in this 3-part story is American Bliss. Now, this serves as the prequel to American Bliss number 1, which I've reviewed on Velvet Room Publishing. I think it's a really good book. So Dave Brink is the creator and writer, with Pal Rodricks doing the pencils and inks. And that's the same writing and drawing team for Perfect 10. And the art in that book is fantastic. So the art in this book is absolutely fantastic as well. And Dave Brink writes a really good story that not only introduces the character of American Bliss, but he sets up these threads that are tied very well in American Bliss number 1. So having, you know, more insight, because I read American Bliss number 1 and then I read this, gives you more insight into her circumstances leading up, in American Bliss number 1. So there's, you know, she's an established character in American Bliss number 1, and this short story tells you how some of those things in her life got established. Very interesting. and it's it's a lot of action. It's like I said, it's a short story. These are all very short stories, so there isn't much time to work with. But what is there? There's a lot of action, and like I said, this very subtle exposition that's packed in there as well. That's explained in American Bliss #1. Really makes this a really standout story, and I think it is the best story in the Powertrip anthology because of the payoff it has in American Bliss #1. And also given the fact that Pow does great work in really bringing Dave's script to life. It's a fantastic story to read, and like I said, it really has the most value in linking with other stuff in the Genuineverse, which is what you want from something like this. And I think I definitely want more stuff like that, where you have these deep tie-ins with the more mainline books or the other series in the Genuineverse, that being American Bliss and Perfect 10 so far. And of course, I think there's Dream Girl and Earthling, and that's all part of the Genuineverse as well. And I haven't read those, so Man Devil could be involved in those series, and I would not know. So I apologize for that. But as solely a Perfect 10 and American Bliss reader, Man Devil isn't what wins it for me. American Bliss certainly is. She's definitely a very attractive, good-looking character, and of course, she's got a very good moral compass. So it's a great concept in superhero comics, and having that short story be a good prequel for her full book is really what stuff like Powertrip should be doing. So I definitely like Powertrip. It's a good anthology. It's 3 short stories. It's very digestible and easy to read. There is a Powertrip issue 2, so this is, that's funding now. It's going to be coming. Of course, I will review that. But I think going forward with Powertrip, it should definitely focus on longer stories. So I would love having like 2, maybe 20-page short stories instead of 1, or instead of 3 stories, having 2 free stories that are under 20 pages, because I think all these stories are under 20 pages. Having like 2 20-page short stories in a Powertrip anthology, I think is going to be the better thing. It gives you more character development. It lets the plot lines breathe a little bit more. You can fit more exposition and weave more action into it to make it feel more digestible to the reader. I definitely think that's a good format to do. So, of course, do the free, pretty short stories, or you can have 2 slightly beefier ones. I think that would be the best way to go for like a Powertrip issue 3. Ongoing is 2 20-page stories, and you can really develop a lot of really juicy stuff that gets explained and mentioned in other books. But that is my review of Powertrip. It's a great anthology, 3 short stories. They're all fun to read, and that's really all you can ask with comic books. Joker is out.